Good day and welcome to the second part in a series of discussion on the findings of the Linden Commission of Inquiry. Just to recap, the COI final report was handed over to President Donald Ramotar on February 28th, and among the findings and recommendations, you have a list of them. One, it shows clearly that the Home Affairs Minister, Clement Rohi, in no way gave instruction to the police. Also, it outlines the compensation package or packages for the individuals who were injured, damage to their property, and those who lost their lives. And of course, a list of recommendations as it relates to the SOPs of the GINA police force. Joining me in this part of the discussion are three young but very distinguished attorneys at law. I want to start first with Latchmie Rahamat. Happy belated International Women's Day. So that's why I start with her, Mr. Peter Hugh and Mr. Euclin Gomes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The three of you would have been through the entire process of the Linden COI from the very beginning to the very end. Your initial thoughts as it relates to how the Commission would have conducted its work over that period. Who wants to go first? You must you.
Quite fine. I thought the process was very professional. A period, if I recall correctly, and Mr. Gomes, I think, may be better to speak on this. Statements were collected. Then the Commission called witnesses. Counsel for the various interested parties were permitted to question those witnesses. At the end of that questioning, submissions were made. The Commission took those under consideration, I suppose, and that is how the report came to be. That was the process, as I recall, in a nutshell.
Mr. Rahamat?
Well, actually, I would have joined the Commission about the third week after it commenced. I was not there from the actual beginning. From the time I joined the Commission, I must state that I found the entire process to be completely transparent. This was nothing that was happening behind closed doors. It was open to the public to come in at any point in time. Any man on the road could have walked in and sat and listened to the evidence of the individuals who came and said they had something that they wished to say in relation to what happened on the 18th. We also need to know that the commissioners themselves, right, also requested specific persons to come and testify so that they would be able to get the entire picture of what would have unfolded on the 18th. All in all, I think the integrity of the Commission remained intact from beginning up until they have published this report, and I find the report to be completely in relation to the evidence that was taken before the Commission quite just, and I also support the findings in the report.
Mr. Gomes.
Thank you. Well, I was there from the inception, and what strikes me as very, very important in the process is that the commissioners did indicate at their earliest meeting that no person, I repeat, no person will be excluded from testifying before the Commission. The commissioners did go to Linden. Representatives of the Commission did go to Linden and take evidence from persons. I am aware that instructions were given to the coordinator of the Linden Commission of Inquiry that should there be anyone who needed assistance to get to Georgetown in order that they may be able to testify, should have been given assistance, financial and otherwise, to have them present. The point I am making is that the Commission went backward, bent backward to accommodate all those persons who thought that they had some contribution to make, whether they were aggrieved directly or indirectly as a result of what happened in Linden on the 18th and subsequent to the 18th of July 2012.
Let me ask you this question quickly, though. Do you think, all right, they would have afforded every single person the opportunity to testify? Being present during when these testimonies were given, do you think, in your view, or anyone of the other lawyers here, in your view, that persons were afforded adequate time to say what, give whatever evidence they think they may have?
You have to divide the evidence into two aspects. One, where I understand your question is meaning when they came to give the statements, or when they came
When they appeared
before
the commission.
Oh, no one was hurried before the commission. The commissioners were patient. The commissioners ensured that there was an atmosphere of where intimidation that is ordinarily associated with the courtroom was removed. Those of us who did go and sit there would remember. I would recall the lightness that especially Commissioner Katie Knight tried to inject into it, so as to make people feel people spoke freely. And I think that is a plus. It can only be a positive sign, a positive aspect of the commission. Persons were allowed to speak as much as they wanted, all they wanted. And please remember that they were assisted by attorneys who helped them to prepare and to present their testimony in a way that would be quite clear and coherent to the commissioners.
You wanna add to that?
I think really and truly everyone had a fair opportunity to be heard. No one was shut down. It seemed, however, that certain witnesses may have taken up more time than others, but that's as a result, I suppose, of the commissioners asking questions as well as examination for the lawyers for the various interested parties. And that is how it may appear that some witnesses might have spent a day in the box, whereas certain witnesses who may have been more in relation to compensation may have taken a shorter time.
All right. That's for that as it relates to the work of the commission from when it's began sitting to the very end. As I said earlier, the report was handed over to the president on February 28th. And as lawyers who would have been representing members of some of those who went before the commission for whatever reason, your thoughts, I know Latchmie would have touched briefly that she satisfied with the findings and so forth, but Mr. Yu, your thoughts on as it relates to the findings of the commission.
Well, what I would say, in order to look at that, one should actually look at the entire report as opposed to just the summary. I had the opportunity of representing the members of the GINA police force as it relates to this commission. Now, there are several paragraphs that I can draw to your attention that I found were quite interesting in relation to the police. I actually highlighted them. I don't know if you just permit me.
Go right ahead, go right ahead.
For instance, paragraph 11 states clearly, after considering the testimony of the witnesses, it is clear that there is absolutely no direct evidence from which one could unreservedly conclude that the three deceased were shot to death by the police detachment on the bridge. You see, there was no direct evidence of that. Now, there are other paragraphs that made reference to the finding in relation to the police. For instance, paragraph 61. There is no direct evidence that any of the deceased persons were actually shot by the police. Now, as we go a little further, I believe it might have been at paragraph 87, the commission refers to the positive evidence, and they said the positive evidence reveals no police officer was injured, police were armed with guns, no evidence that anyone else was so armed, From these factors, one can therefore, and this is paragraph 88, from these factors, one can therefore reasonably conclude that a fatal shooting was done by the police. You see, what they're saying, at least as I understand it, Mr. Lane, is that because there's no evidence that anyone else was so armed, and this is evidence that came before the commission, they drew the conclusion that the shooting had to have been done by the police. So you see, they're drawing an inference. There's no direct evidence whatsoever. And because there was a lack of evidence before the commission that anyone else was armed, we do not know. That, I believe, is why they came to that conclusion.
But I think if we could spend some time on this, like I think this is one of the interesting things that came out in the report, but not really in the public domain, because I think persons are taking, like you said, bits and pieces of the report and releasing bits and pieces, and I think that is creating some sort of confusion in the minds of people. So if we could spend some time on this particular issue. I see Latchmie, you.
Well, that is why we have a great appreciation for what you're doing here right now, Mr. Lane. By having these discussions is the only way that we can put the entirety of this report out in the public domain. One needs to understand that while there is a summary and a conclusion to this report is in excess of 100 pages, in excess of 180 paragraphs. When you read each and every paragraph that is within this report, you're able to understand, because the commissioners wrote very simply. Anyone reading this report will be able to follow it. But you must read it in its entirety to understand how it is the commissioners were able to reach that particular finding, that it was in fact the police responsible. People are taking that and running with it. One needs to first understand, and I wish to touch on this a bit, is the standard of proof used by the members of the commission. They made their findings on a balance of probability. And the standard of proof is not within like criminal trials where it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So what they have done, as Mr. Hugh has highlighted, while they are saying that there is a lack of direct evidence that, look, it is the police who caused the death of these 3 persons, they are still in fact on a balance of probability, making the finding that it was the police who were responsible because of the fact that the only evidence they had before them, talking about who was armed, the only evidence they received were that the police were the only ones they saw with guns. Right? Now, I do in fact appreciate that we are discussing this particular issue because there are several things which are being put forward in the public domain, but you don't really understand how it is the commissioners reach that particular finding. So while culpability of the police is a particular hot issue right now, we need to understand the reasoning, and I do in fact believe that Mr. Hugh has in fact hit the nail on the head. It is the lack thereof evidence upon which they were able to reach this conclusion.
I think, like you said, I think the police were responsible, or was responsible for the shooting. I think that's the line that is being carried, or the line that is being harped on.
Mr. Lane, that may be so, but let me interject for one moment. Paragraph 113 of the report states clearly, the view is that had the protesters responded favorably to the withdrawal request made by the police, the result of the event would have been completely different, and that is the bottom line.
I was coming to that. I was coming to the police giving adequate, following the SOPs by using the loudhailer, banners, because there is a video showing the police using the banners, the loudhailer, and so forth. But I still don't want us to come off of the issue of culpability because, like I said, the line is being used. The police, the commissioners found the police responsible, and I think, Latchmie, you would have spent some time there bringing out how you know, more or less they came to that conclusion.
I wish to also bring, you're talking about who is responsible. Let's look at paragraph 112. Paragraph 112 says that this is indicative of the attitude of the organizers of the protests, and they must accept some responsibility for what subsequently transpired on the 18th of July 2012 at Linden. We have at least 3 to 4 paragraphs specifically naming several organizers of the protests who were also members of parliament, and the report was not very favorable in regard to them. I can read paragraph 111, which is the paragraph immediately preceding the one I just read. Mr. Sharma Solomon is the chairman of the Regional Democratic Council Region 10, which includes Linden, the people who made the application for permission to stage a peaceful march. When questioned, he said it did not occur to him that blocking of the bridge was a breach of the permission which was granted to hold a peaceful march. We also have reference being made in the same report where the organizers themselves were contacted by the police but did not or failed to persuade the protesters to come off the bridge. The report is written in such a way that it did not only lay blame at the feet of the police, but it laid blame at the feet of the organizers. It even said at one point in time that the march could have been cancelled and everything would have been avoided. The report covered every single thing and assessed every piece of evidence. They had in excess of 70 persons testifying before them. So you need to understand that while you look at the summary, it does not only lay blame at the feet of the police. While they're saying they're responsible for the shooting, like Mr. Hugh pointed out, because of a lack thereof evidence, it is also examining how indeed the situation reached the stage it reached. Because at lunchtime, for example, there is evidence that came out that the police went on the scene and spoke to the organizers, asking them to ask the protesters to leave, and nothing was done. In fact, there was testimony coming, I believe it was from Mr. Stanton, where the protesters were telling the people to stay on the bridge at that point in time. And this is the evidence which the commissioners would have taken into consideration in writing this report. That is why I feel before anyone else or before anyone makes a conclusion on the findings, they must sit and read every single paragraph of this particular report.
Mr. Gomes, I see you.
I wish to put it this way. I'm reinforcing what Peter has said and Latchmie. Had this been a trial in a criminal court, the police would not have been found guilty.
Definitely.
That's the bottom line.
Bottom line.
That's the bottom line. I think Latchmie did explain that by a process of elimination, the police is left. And that is not how my understanding of a criminal trial operates. You must have evidence to support your contention that that is so. So if you look at one specific paragraph where the commissioners say that the police are culpable, without finding out the basis upon which they have reached that conclusion.
But that's the point I was making. I mean, people are just using that one line.
Yeah. That is going to be a very irresponsible way to analyze the report for one's benefit. If you were to have the benefit of the report, it is not going to be a good thing to just take a little piece of it and start running with it. And the commissioners directly or indirectly alluded to the fact that there ought to have been greater responsibility shown on the part of the organizers. We can't forget that at all. Each of us, we have our rights. They are enshrined in the Constitution, and there are several paragraphs in the articles in the Constitution that deal with fundamental rights. But I don't think for one moment that your rights must infringe on mine. That cannot be. It was never intended to be. So we have a document that is comprehensive. It dealt with all aspects of what happened. And it cannot be read in part, it has to be read in its entirety. And that is important.
And
The man out there must understand that.
And that's a difficulty we face, because certain persons are picking out bits and pieces and using those pieces to further their own ambitions. That's what I've noticed, and I believe that is irresponsible. They have to look at it as a whole and not just at the bits that may be favorable to them.
Well, hence the reason for this program, because I myself reading newspaper articles, statements coming out and so on, and using that and juxtapose it to the report, the actual report, because I have a copy of the report. I think there is either deliberate effort to ignore certain facts in that report. But I want to take you guys down maybe another road, right from the report, and that has to do with the issue of compensation. There seem to be, again, all sorts of statements coming out as it relates to why and how persons were awarded who would have stood before the commission, give evidence in the cases of those who were killed, based on the evidence given by protesters, persons in Linden, relatives, so forth. Your initial or your thoughts as it relates to compensation overall?
Now, Mr. Lane, with respect to compensation, there are two, I would like to look at two groups. First, those persons who their estates would have received compensation for their death, and those who had personal injuries. Now, one cannot put a price tag to a human life. What the court generally would seek to do is assess certain things: income, expenses, living conditions, and would basically get a ballpark figure, look at taxes. There's so many things that a court would look at in arriving at a figure. There are so many things. There are things that will make the award go up. There are things that will have to be taken out. It will make it go down. Now, this is a commission. I suppose as legal persons, they'd be aware of these factors. And if these are the quantums that in the circumstances they thought were reasonable based upon the evidence that came out, I have no difficulty in accepting that. Now, I don't recall specifically whether the persons who died, any actual proof of their income or earnings was ever furnished to the commission. So I'd rather believe, or I suspect, that these awards were based upon the evidence that was presented to the commissioners, and based upon that evidence they would have assessed the evidence and come up with their award, and I would accept those quantums in respect of the persons who lost their lives, their estates. Now, with respect to the persons who suffered personal injuries, they went before the commission. They testified. Their medicals were tendered in relation to their injuries, and they also testified as to their earnings. Now, some of the commissioners, in some of the paragraphs in this report, it is noted that they did not believe some of them. I rather suspect, and the commissioners did state in the report, that some of the quantums were inflated. For instance, it struck me, and I will always remember, that one young man came and testified with respect to his clothing and indicated that he had gone protesting in a Gucci shirt and a Gucci pants, and he wanted compensation for that clothing. He never produced any receipt or anything, or said, he just pulled the figure out of the air. This is what I paid for my pants, and this is what I paid for my shirt. And I suppose the commission took all those factors, the demeanor of the persons, into consideration and came to their conclusions, and as such made their recommendations. Certain persons, I believe, got quite high compensation, and it's all contained in that section of the report.
Again, I would want to believe, before you go, Latchmie, I would want to believe it has to do with, like you rightly said, what is presented to the commissioners, right? Yes, go ahead.
Before I begin on this aspect, let me just read for the benefit of the public the specific term of reference under which the commissioners were able to deal with compensation. It is under 3D, and it says make recommendations for compensation where necessary for injury, loss, or damage as a consequence of the events of July 18, 2012. I wish to bring to your attention, Mr. Lane, paragraph 198, that is the very first paragraph immediately after this specific term of reference is referred to. It says as follows: as we see it, this term is quite wide. It enables us to recommend the payment of compensation irrespective of whether or not we find the police were in any way culpable for their actions on July 18th. We can make recommendations for payment of compensation by the state where we find it necessary to do so. However, payment for compensation recommended has to be ex gratia, which means as a favor rather than as a legal obligation. Now, what this tells us is that in assessing compensation, first of all, the commissioners are telling you we are able to make recommendations for compensation whether or not we think the police is liable, or whether or not we think the police action was justified. That is just a breakdown of what is written here. In relation to there has been some talk in relation to the amount of compensation granted by or recommended by the commissioners in relation to specific individuals. Now, before I comment on this, I wish to read to you how the commissioners wrote on two specific people, and then I will give you my specific opinion as it relates to compensation. This is under Jamiki Bromell, paragraph 218. It says, he works at a car wash and suffered injuries to his right leg. He was in the vicinity of the bridge, and it would appear that he was part of the protest. He was another person who exaggerated his loss of earnings. As a worker at a car wash, he could not have been earning as much as $15,000 per week. We feel an award of $100,000 is appropriate, which is for loss of earnings and traveling expenses he would have incurred. We have also Mr. Mortimer Cornell, and this is what the commissioner said at paragraph 225. He's self-employed, he operated a car wash and does some farming. He lives on the Mackenzie side of the bridge. On July 18, 2012, he was crossing the bridge from the Wisma side when he was shot and received injuries on his left arm, left waist, abdomen, and left leg. He did not go to the hospital that day as the police had arrested him on suspicion of arson. On his release, he went to the Mackenzie Hospital where he was examined by Dr. Rysat. He no longer carries on the car wash, but he rented it out. This witness impressed us as a truthful witness. He said his total loss, including the loss of his earnings for the period, is $155,000. There should be an award of $200,000 in his favor. The bottom line is, Mr. Lane, is that when you come to testify before a tribunal, before a judge, or before a magistrate, or even when a case is given to the jury for them to consider guilt or acquittal, everyone is told that you must examine the demeanor of the witness when they're giving evidence. The commissioners, in assessing these damages or these compensations, assess whether or not the individuals who came before them and claimed that I earned X dollars and this is the amount of money I lost, or I suffered this injury and I felt pain and suffering, and I felt pain and I suffered because of the injuries. The commissioners assess their demeanor. The commissioner assessed whether or not they were able to prove the income they had. And if you read here, the commission assessed whether or not they were there as part of the illegal, unlawful act of blocking the bridge. And that also affected how much compensation these individuals got. In relation to the compensation aspect, I wish to say this, that you also need to read this specific individual's assessment, because it wasn't a broad heading that, look, everyone gets 3 million or everyone gets 50,000. Each case, each individual that testified before the commission was assessed individually. When you read what the commissioners said before they made compensation for those individuals, you see the reasoning behind that particular sum being awarded. I cannot find any fault or any fact given the reasoning that the commissioners would have given behind every individual, even down to the ones that had loss of property. They produced documents for in excess of 14 million because that was the amount of money they paid for their property, which was damaged. But they were not given back 14 million because of the fact that wear and tear, it was not brand new. And, you know, the aspect of you ought to have had comprehensive insurance, but you know insurance is very expensive. So those are also factors taken into consideration in relation to the people with property, because they did not get back the money they were claiming. And that is all I wish to say, is that even on the aspect of compensation, we have the issue here that you're hearing the final amount awarded, but people are not in their minds aware of the reasoning behind that. And without that reasoning, I believe it is also responsible for people to just push, look, these get this amount and those get that amount.
Mr. Gomes?
I wish to say that the Commission's recommendations as far as it relates to compensation, as I understand it, it's not binding. It's not binding on anyone, on any party. And as such, all those persons who feel that there is some level of inadequacy as it relates to compensation, they have got other remedies. I would not attempt to justify the adequacy or inadequacy of it. What I do know is that in a civil court, there is a guideline for calculating compensation for death, loss of limb, eyes, and so on. There is over the years, they have been able to establish some more or less standard, so one can reasonably anticipate what the level of compensation. But let me add quickly that there is this principle of contributory negligence as well. And had the commissioners factored that in, some people may not have been entitled to any compensation, or very little. That much I am prepared to say. But I want to touch on, there are two persons that I recall vividly who suffered great loss in excess of 4 million. Latchmie may touch lightly, briefly on it. These persons, one, well, it's part of the testimonies. I can call it Dr. Clokey, and there is this other guy who was transporting fuel, like Mohan, I think it is.
Carlton
Mohan. Now, these persons did not have anything to do with the protests. They were legitimate business people going along their way, doing what they do to survive, and they were caught up in this protest. As a result, they have suffered loss, great loss. The commissioner's recommendation as it relates to the compensation cannot result in them being able to recover their losses from what is offered. So, as Latchmie said, and I agree with that, is that the evidence that was produced before the commissioners, that is the only thing that the commissioners had to go on, nothing else. I have had the opportunity during the taking of statements and so on to look at estimates and quotations and so on that were submitted. The mathematics, the addition was wrong. People are adding up what was mathematically supposed to be 15,000 and getting 26,000. And those had to be pointed out. Of course, I cannot tamper with the witness statement of anyone, but I had to draw it to the attention of some of the witness, say, listen, you need to check the maths because it's not adding up. That same person or those same persons would have gone before the commission. And when questioned by the commission, of course the commissioners were inquiring as to whether what you are saying, in fact, is accurate, and they would have asked certain questions. Some people were found wanting. Those persons who did go and witness and sit down and listen to what was going on, the demeanor of the witness, any magistrate, any judge, any tribunal would have concluded that they're lying.
But since we were talking about, you said, you indicated that the compensation packages, if you want to put it that way, it's not binding on any party, anyone. There are procedures that they could follow and systems they could use to seek for the redress. I saw statements coming out now about persons weighing their legal options and what they could do to ensure that it's increased and so forth. It is clear that persons could move to the court to or use the available mechanisms to seek even greater compensation. But could you explain the process as it relates to getting compensation awarded by the commission as against getting compensation awarded by the court?
Well, first and foremost, the commission has made its recommendation, and they may receive payments as a result of this report. However, it's said to be ex gratia, as Mr. Rahamat mentioned earlier. Now, if persons are aggrieved and they wish to go to court, they would have to testify in court, and the rules of court would have to be adhered to. They run the risk of some people may get more, some people may get less, some people may get nothing at all, because the commission was really an informal setting, and there are rules of court, rules of pleading, rules with respect to how damages are assessed and awarded. For instance, certain amounts claimed, we refer to them as special damages, have to be pleaded. In addition to being pleaded, they have to be strictly proven. For instance, you can't say, well, I used to work for $100,000 just like that. You're claiming $100,000. You have to have proof of it. It must be specifically pleaded and proven. So unlike the commission where persons said, I'm a seamstress, I worked for so much, unless you can prove it in the court, you may not get that compensation. So it's open to people to approach the court, but they do run the risk. They may get more, they may get less, or they may get nothing at all. And if a party is dissatisfied, they can then go to the Court of Appeal, and if again they're dissatisfied, they can go to the CCJ, Caribbean Court of Justice. The process in itself may take quite a bit of time also. So that is an option open to them if they feel aggrieved.
So in essence, you're saying, okay, fine, you get this, you don't want it, you seek redress from the court. The first attempt at redress may not be the end of the road, and may not be a case where you get your compensation. You might be going on and on because of appeals and so forth. And secondly, I think that the fundamental point here, and I think that what you're making, is the fact that the commission, based on you going in before the commission, doesn't say, okay, I've been working for this, I earned this, this is what I lost, etc., etc. They use that, and using their own experience in these matters, decided to, I think this person should be compensated this. And in the case of the court, you have to produce, if there is such a term in the legal fraternity, hard evidence to say, well, this is exactly, I'm earning $100,000, here's my pay slip, or this is my business, this is my returns, or you have to produce the evidence.
But that is exactly what Mr. Hugh is saying. That is the point. when you come to the Commission of Inquiry and you say, I make $15,000 a week, and you don't produce the supporting evidence to prove to the commissioners that you make $15,000 a week because of the informal setting and because of the latitude the commissioners have addressed in relation to this term of reference. If they feel it's necessary, they will award compensation. One has to appreciate that if you do in fact seek redress from the courts, you have to follow the strict court procedures, and the evidential requirement and burden will rest upon you when you're pleading your special damages. You are called to strict proof. And if you cannot or are unable to prove that you earn X dollars, then really and truly you will be found lacking by the court, unable to prove your pleadings. As simple as that.
And more importantly, I suppose, the defendant is going to be represented in court. The defendant is not going to just sit back and say, well, in any civil matter, the defendant will try his best to establish that they are not strictly liable for the claims made by the plaintiff.
So I would want to
Here we
believe.
go again.
I would want to believe the commission is okay. You didn't really produce evidence that you're earning this much, but based on medical records here, indeed you were injured, and you may not have been able to work for a couple of days. So you might say $15,000 a day, but we know that you weren't able to work.
Exaggerated,
So
exactly.
we have to give you, we have to ensure that you get something, because we're convinced because of the injuries you couldn't work. The amount that you're talking about is another issue. We're quickly slipping out of time, but I want to ask you guys, I guess this is the first time you've been involved in something of this nature. Could you say, what was the experience like?
Well, you know, Edward, you're right. This was the first time that I have participated in a commission of inquiry, and it has been, how can I describe it? It's been very, very interesting. I have gained a lot in terms of seeing how a commission works. It's something that does not come up too often in our field, and to be a part of it, to be a part of history, it meant a lot to me, and I was very, very happy to be a part of the Commission of Inquiry into the incident at Linden on the 18th.
Latchmie.
I must say that, first of all, I am very honored to have been given the opportunity to be part of this commission. I found that it was very enriching. It can only add to my experience because I am still very young in the profession. Not many people have had the opportunity throughout their careers, and they've been in this profession for more than 20, 25 years, have had the opportunity to sit on a commission. It's a decision which I will not regret. I have learned so much from the process. And I must add this, that even being before that panel, because they are so in their own right, have so much experience and so much integrity, sitting before them was in itself an honor. And watching these individuals cross-examine, because they themselves ask witnesses questions. As a young lawyer, I was sometimes in awe at how they were able to elicit evidence piece by piece. It is an experience which I will take with me in the future. And again, let me just add that I do believe the integrity of this commission has in fact remained intact, given the fact that the entire process was so transparent. I do not see how anyone can question the integrity.
What a way as young lawyers to start your career. Mr. Gomes, you seem to be the more mature, older of the lot.
Yes.
Sorry to use the word older, but of the lot.
Without a doubt, the experience that I have gained working with the commissioners is invaluable. I will not forget the experience at all. And as a matter of fact, it is going to have a positive impact on the work that I do, legal work that I continue to do. Unlike my two colleagues here, I worked directly with the commissioners as counsel for the commissioners, and I have had this opportunity to sit at the planning, the pre-hearing sessions and the post-testimony sessions, and it was very, very, very enriching to find out how the commissioners were thinking, the way they were analyzing the testimony. And there are times when I was at awe to find out that they were listening so attentively. Every little minute detail of a witness was being, even though if they might not have made a comment on the, but at those sessions that we've had subsequent to the day's work or the testimony, that you will find out that this is in fact a group of very, very talented, skilled, and dedicated people. And I think that the composition of the commission was very, very well put together, and we had our former Chancellor of Appeal, Mr. Kennard, and Justice Claudette Singh, and the others that we've had the benefit from, the Jamaican former Chief Justice. I think we could not have had a better team. And they stuck to their task, produced the commission, the report in the time that His Excellency the President had recommended that according to the terms of reference, and they did succeed in doing so. I think they did a fantastic job.
Ms. Latchmie Rahamat, Mr. Peter Hugh, Mr. Euclin Gomes, I want to thank you guys very much. I think quite a lot of information has been put to the public as it relates to the Linden Commission of Inquiry, the report, and maybe clear up some misconceptions as it relates to these little pieces that are being released as to who's responsible, who gets what, and so forth. Of course, I want to thank you very much, and I want to thank you very much for joining us. Of course, we're going to continue the discussion, and of course, like I said in the very first discussion of this type, that our intention is to include all concerned as it relates to the report and to flesh out the details of the report. Of course, we are still looking to have the political parties being involved in one of the discussions. So again, I want to thank you very much for joining us.